Actually, the next thing I want to do there is get a tennis court built. And I still have the pool table somewhere, don't I? The pool table, we don't have it anymore.
When Ozzy Osbourne drew his last breath on July 22nd, the world had barely begun to mourn, when a shocking secret emerged from his final will and testament. A massive fortune worth over $200 million, comprising music royalties, real estate in both the UK and the US, shares in the Ozzy brand, and a slew of post-career image rights, was left to only one person. A name seemingly familiar, but now igniting a fiery, unending family feud. Immediately after the lawyer announced that none of Ozzy Osbourne's 3 children from his first marriage would receive any inheritance, the trio contacted attorneys and began preparing for legal action. Theories erupted at breakneck speed. Was Ozzy, whose health had deteriorated to the point he could no longer care for himself, truly of sound mind when signing his final will? Or was someone behind the scenes caring for him while also manipulating and controlling him? Discover the contents of Ozzy's final will and how his empire was divided in this very video. 1. Lawyer announces shocking will. On the early morning of July 22, 2025, an eerie silence fell over the Osbourne mansion in Buckinghamshire. Sharon, Ozzy's wife of over 40 years, was the first to enter the bedroom after a night of no response from him. On the bed, Ozzy lay motionless, his complexion pale as snow, but disturbingly peaceful. A minute of silence. Sharon screamed and called for medical assistance, but every effort to revive him was futile. The rock legend had passed away in his sleep, without a goodbye, leaving no one a final chance to say farewell. Just hours later, a brief yet earth-shattering statement was issued by the family. Ozzy Osbourne passed away this morning, surrounded by his loved ones. The person delivering the news was none other than Sharon, his wife manager, and now the gatekeeper of his legacy. The world was stunned. Major news outlets scrambled to publish the story, fans were left reeling, and those closest to Ozzy began to ask questions. But the controversy escalated when Ozzy's will was revealed. Instantly, it ignited a firestorm within the Osbourne family. Ozzy Osbourne, rock legend, icon of darkness and rebellion, left this world amid global mourning. Yet while grief gripped the masses, another darker door creaked open, the door of inheritance, where a $220 million empire awaited judgment. And in that darkness, a silent war over his legacy began, tight as an electric guitar string. At the center of it all was Sharon Osbourne, the iron wife, the lifelong partner, the supreme manager who helped Ozzy build an empire. The will granted her full control over the massive fortune until her passing. From music royalties and multi-million-dollar properties in the UK and US, to shares in powerhouse ventures like Ozfest, Sharon emerged as the queen on the Osbourne financial chessboard. She didn't just inherit, she ruled. But every reign has an expiration. And once Sharon's chapter ends, the 3 children she shared with Ozzy, Amy, Kelly, and Jack are next in line to inherit the throne. These names, once shining stars of television, now face a destiny entangled in the distribution of hundreds of millions. But is this inheritance truly equal or just a fragile mask over simmering tensions? Amy Osbourne, the eldest daughter who shunned the spotlight and refused to participate in the Osbournes' reality show, received the most distinct inheritance. A trust fund was created exclusively for her, with staggered disbursements restricted until she turns 50. The decision cuts like a veiled wound. Ozzy loved his daughter, but didn't hand her the keys right away. A gentle control, but loaded with subtext. Was there an unresolved fracture between father and daughter? In sharp contrast, Kelly Osbourne, rebellious, bold, and calculating, was named co-executor of the will alongside her mother. With access to core assets, she's not just an heir, but the gatekeeper of the treasure. Kelly has the authority to approve or deny any future distribution of assets. A strategic move, one with explosive potential. Jack Osbourne, the only son, wasn't left out of the storm. He inherited real estate in California, along with control over his father's music royalties, a gold mine that never runs dry. Once the boy from a reality show, Jack is now the guardian of a musical legacy. But does he have the strength to withstand the financial undercurrents from his very own bloodline? The plot thickened further when Ozzy's 3 children from his first marriage, Elliot, Jessica, and Lewis, also appeared in the will. Rarely mentioned publicly, but not forgotten. They were given a total of $5 million held in a UK trust, untouchable by anyone else. However, the notable detail: they were excluded from any involvement in decisions surrounding the Ozzy Osbourne brand. A bitter exclusion, like one final cut from the father who had always been absent in their youth. Ozzy's fortune isn't just cash mansions or luxury cars, it's symbolic value, brand power, and a catalogue of hundreds of songs generating eternal royalties. Whoever holds the rights holds the wealth across generations. But strength doesn't always prevail, and the seemingly weak may hold the master key. However, as the will was unveiled, suspicious signs emerged. Shocking conspiracy theories spread. So what really happened? 2. The final years of a legend. In the last 3 years of his life, Ozzy Osbourne endured a prolonged and excruciating medical battle. His medical records were a dense list of harrowing conditions: motor neuron degeneration, chronic myelitis, spinal cord injuries, and complications from Parkinson's. To manage the symptoms, Ozzy underwent a combination of stem cell therapy, immune regulation, and intensive rehabilitation. Throughout Ozzy Osbourne's storm-ridden final years, one woman stood behind him like an impenetrable fortress: Sharon Osbourne. She wasn't just a wife, she was a protector, a manager, the mastermind behind every movement in the rock legend's life. When Ozzy collapsed under the weight of Parkinson's, Sharon never left his side. From hospitals to mansions, from therapy rooms to recording studios, every breath Ozzy took was monitored and controlled by her, as if she were commanding a crumbling empire under siege. Parkinson's, this insidious disease that made his limbs tremble, slowed his voice, and clouded his mind, attacked Ozzy quietly but relentlessly. Yet it wasn't just Parkinson's. He carried lingering trauma from the 2003 ATV accident's spinal surgeries and the cold metal rods embedded beneath his skin. Amidst this physical storm, Sharon coordinated doctors' scheduled therapy, curated his diet, and even managed the words Ozzy was allowed to say in public. Ozzy didn't always cooperate. Once he lashed out at the nursing team in pain, until Sharon entered the room. She said nothing, only stared at him. And the legend fell silent. Her control wasn't violent. It was a kind of invisible authority honed through decades of surviving the entertainment industry alongside Ozzy battling drugs, alcohol scandals, and even the wild beast that was her own husband. Without Sharon, Ozzy might have died long ago. He once admitted in a 2023 interview, "I'm a sinking ship, and she's the only one who can swim." When depression struck him for not being able to walk, Sharon built a mini recording studio in their mansion so he could keep making music, so he could still feel useful. When the media asked about him, She smiled coldly. Ozzy doesn't need pity. He needs to be remembered as a warrior. Multiple sources confirmed Sharon declined dozens of talk show invites and management offers to dedicate herself fully to her husband. She even severed contact with some relatives to maintain absolute silence in the mansion, a sanctuary where Ozzy wrestled with medicine tremors and the loneliness of a god trapped in a broken body. Every meeting from Zoom, calls with record labels to interviews had to be approved by Sharon. No Sharon, no Ozzy, no one touched him without going through her. Staff members said Sharon even installed a 24/7 surveillance system in the house to monitor Ozzy's condition. Once when he snuck out of bed to find an old whiskey bottle hidden in a drawer, she appeared within 90 seconds. She didn't yell. She just poured the liquor down the sink. The way she looked at him, not with anger, but like a mother watching her child break a beloved toy, made Ozzy break down in tears. Sharon didn't just care for Ozzy's body, she held on to his soul. When his memory faltered, when he couldn't recognize the person in front of him, Sharon would sit beside him, recounting every career milestone like a bedtime story. "You are the Prince of Darkness," she would whisper. "And even if the world forgets, I will never forget that look in your eyes when you stepped onto that first stage." Ozzy's final days were no longer filled with wild nights or roaring stadiums. They were bitter, cold mornings where he couldn't hold a spoon, spine-searing pain that made him groan like a wounded beast. But one thing never changed. Sharon was always there. When doctors said he had only months left, she nodded and said, "Then we still have plenty of work to do." And in the end, Ozzy Osbourne took his final breath on the morning of July 22nd, 2025, in his private Buckinghamshire estate. When the heart of the Prince of Darkness stopped beating, the music world trembled. Bouquets, candles, and banners reading Ozzy Forever flooded Birmingham, his hometown, where he first sang the songs that would define more than 5 decades of unfathomable career. Yet unlike the solemn image of a traditional funeral, Ozzy had made an unusual request. In his final months, he wanted one last music party where people would laugh, sing and dance to his legendary tracks, whether from Black Sabbath or even Justin Bieber. "I don't need a vigil, I need one more stage," Ozzy said in his final interview. That wish sent shockwaves through the media and left millions of fans in a daze of sorrow and awe. Sources revealed a private funeral had been meticulously planned at an ancient church near London, while a public memorial might be held in Birmingham with names like Metallica Elton John and Robert Plant, possibly performing in his honor. But everything remains speculation. The press is barred from the mansion, and close aides are maintaining strict silence. What stands out, however, is the Back to the Beginning performance at Villa Park, Birmingham, just weeks before his death, now viewed as his unofficial final act. Ozzy seated on an iron throne. His voice no longer thunderous, but still razor-sharp, delivered each note like a silent farewell to his fans. The concert ended with thunderous applause from tens of thousands. And only now do people understand that was Ozzy's true funeral, a warrior's farewell, right in the heart of the battlefield of music. 3 suspicious points in the will. But even before the ink on Ozzy's will had dried, the storm had already broken loose. The most suspicious detail: Sharon Osbourne inherits the entire estate, now standing alone atop a fortune worth over $220 million. Not only does she receive all real estate music rights and brand shares, but she also holds absolute control over the estate's future after her death. No one, not even his biological children, has any authority unless she's no longer breathing. An unprecedented concentration of power. And that very detail raised a burning question. Why did Ozzy choose to divide things this way right before he died? According to close sources, the new will was signed less than 3 months before Ozzy took his last breath. Previous versions, which divided the estate more clearly between Sharon and the children, were voided. This change occurred while Ozzy's health was severely deteriorating, his memory declining, and his daily life entirely dependent on Sharon. Was he truly of sound mind when he signed, or was he guided by someone who had long mastered backstage manipulation? Though no evidence has surfaced yet, Sharon's total dominance in the new will, while Ozzy's 3 children from a previous marriage receive only undisclosed portions of the estate, has drawn serious scrutiny. Those children are left out of any role involving the brand royalties or long-term revenue-generating assets. Why could blood ties really be worth less than a marriage contract? Even more questionable, all powers, following Sharon's death, from control of branding and copyrights to the management of liquid assets, are granted solely to their 3 children, together, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. There is not a single mention of any provision for the other children, nor even a trust for grandchildren, a clause often present in standard wills. Could there be a bloodline-cutting conspiracy hidden beneath the facade of a well-organized estate plan? Another shadowy detail only deepens suspicion. The witness who signed the will was Sharon's longtime personal lawyer, not an independent attorney as is customary. This has raised concerns among legal experts about the objectivity of the drafting and signing process. Was there an invisible hand orchestrating the transfer of a legend's entire fortune at the moment he was weakest? Did Ozzy even fully understand what he was signing? Worse still, an anonymous insider from the Osbourne circle revealed Ozzy once expressed the desire to amend his will to reconcile with his estranged children after an emotional phone call with daughter Jessica last year. But the final will shows no such revision. So what happened? Why did Ozzy's final wishes vanish without a trace? The media is now rife with speculation. In his final days, was Ozzy no longer the Prince of Darkness, but merely a puppet in a hospital bed, signing documents placed in front of him? And if that's true, then a legal firestorm could be brewing. A lawsuit titled Osbourne versus Osbourne may soon shake the entertainment industry to its core. For now, Sharon remains silent. Kelly and Jack dodge all media inquiries, but the once private children from Ozzy's first marriage are reportedly holding closed-door meetings with legal counsel in London. They want to see the full will. They want to know when Ozzy changed his mind. And most of all, they want to know who truly orchestrated the legacy of a legend who once made the world tremble with the metallic roar of rock and roll. For, was Ozzy manipulated by someone? Even so, with the will Ozzy Osbourne left behind, countless theories have emerged surrounding it. The first theory, gentle and reasonable. As many supporters, Ozzy died a natural death. After years of enduring physical pain, battling the cruel grip of Parkinson's, and suffering spinal injuries that left him nearly immobile, Ozzy was utterly drained, both physically and mentally. In his final years, he lived in relative isolation, no longer performing, no longer appearing in public, and entirely dependent on Sharon, his wife, manager caretaker, and the last pillar holding him up. Sharon was not just his life partner, she was the architect behind Ozzy's entire post-Black Sabbath career. She orchestrated every major decision, from world tours to branding strategies. And she was the one who pulled Ozzy back from the abyss of addiction and despair. In 1982, when they married, Ozzy was on the verge of collapse. But she, with sharp wit and unshakable resolve, revived him, turning him into a global solo phenomenon. And ever since, through countless marital storms, Sharon held his hand, never letting go. Everyone remembers the dark days of 2016 when Ozzy was caught cheating with a young hairdresser, and Sharon left the house in fury, declaring their marriage over. Yet, after months apart, she returned, forgave him, and resumed her life, caring for a sick, volatile, and increasingly dependent husband. What few people know, in his 2007 autobiography, Ozzy admitted to being violent towards Sharon, confessing he once lost control and even nearly killed her in a drunken rage. That incident led to mandatory rehab. Those scars never fully healed, but Sharon somehow stayed. So according to this theory, Ozzy's will wasn't a conspiracy, but an act of redemption. A silent apology, a way to repay his past, to atone for the pain betrayals, fights, and the fists Sharon had endured. By leaving her all his music rights, real estate, and the Ozzy brand, he gave her everything, not just money, but reputation and power, to the woman who had steered the ship of his life for 40 years. To many, it's a fitting ending to a complicated love story. There's no perfect love, no couple without shattering and repair, but in the chaotic, scandal-ridden world of rock and roll, Ozzy and Sharon still held hands to the very end. The will, seen through a compassionate lens, is proof of a fierce love, wounded, scarred, but never absent. And if that's truly the case, then no one has the right to question the final choice of a man who lived, loved, and regretted with every ounce of his soul. But the second theory, darker, colder, sends chills down the spine. Sharon was exhausted, worn out, and she, the one who had complete control over Ozzy's life, manipulated him, or worse, ended his suffering prematurely. A peaceful death. No gunshot, no blood. Just a few pills, a medical file, and a quietly signed will in a familiar law office in Los Angeles. What makes things more tangled, the old will, rumored to fairly split the assets between wife and children, suddenly vanished. The new one appeared out of nowhere. Every clear, documented asset fell into Sharon's hands, while the 3 children received only undisclosed parts of the estate. What does that mean? A hidden trust? A small share in the family company? Or just a PR cushion? Public uproar intensified when an old video resurfaced, one where Sharon coldly stated on live TV, "Taking care of Ozzy isn't a wifely duty, it's a burden I bear as his manager." At the time, it was brushed off as a sarcastic joke, but now it echoes as a chilling omen, a signal of exhaustion, of being trapped in a marriage with no escape. Close insiders revealed in his final months, Ozzy often didn't recognize people, spoke incoherently, and sometimes forgot his own children's names. In that condition, was he truly lucid enough to sign the most important legal document of his life? Or was it just a trembling hand guided by a colder, stronger will? The internet is divided. One side defends Sharon, claiming no one is more deserving to preserve Ozzy's image, legacy, and brand. She sacrificed her life for him. Now it's time she gets something back. But the other side isn't convinced. They demand an investigation. They suspect the will was signed under pressure. They want to know if Ozzy's death was truly peaceful or the end of a perfectly orchestrated curtain call. Sharon remains silent. No press statements, no public appearances since the funeral. But that silence only fuels the storm. Media across the UK, US, and Australia are asking the same thing. Behind that sorrowful smile and black mourning veil, was there a meticulously crafted script, a power transfer disguised as love? For now, the truth remains in the shadows where Ozzy once thrived. His death and the controversial will are tearing his global fan base apart. It may take years, or perhaps we'll never know the full story. But one thing's certain, Ozzy left behind not just music, but a mystery the world can't look away from. And perhaps that's his final, most dangerous legacy, a rock legend who refused to die quietly. 5. A glorious career and the legacy left behind. The centerpiece of his journey was Black Sabbath, the foundation of a musical style that had never existed before. When Ozzy Osbourne was pushed out of Black Sabbath in 1979, expelled from the very band he helped create, many thought his time was over. Drowning in alcohol, drugs, and crisis, Ozzy seemed to be consumed by the very darkness he once sang about. But in that moment of apparent collapse, the Prince of Darkness rose again, fierce, defiant, and unrelenting, embarking on one of the wildest and most legendary solo careers in rock history. No one expected that just a year after being fired, Ozzy would drop Blizzard of Oz 1980, a bombshell that shook critics and stormed the charts. Crazy Train rang out like a siren, heralding a new reign. No longer chained to Sabbath, Ozzy was now the ruler of his own heavy metal kingdom. With guitar genius Randy Rhoads, he rewrote the rulebook, turning pain into blazing immortal music. Then came Diary of a Madman, 1981. Dark, haunting, yet a masterpiece. But just as his career was taking flight, fate struck cruelly. Randy Rhoads died in a plane crash. The world thought Ozzy would collapse. But no, he rose, bloodied and cracked, and continued with Bark at the Moon, where he screamed through madness and shadows, turning loss into nuclear fuel. Ozzy didn't die. He became immortal. Album after album, the ultimate sin. No rest for the wicked and no more tears, featuring the chilling ballad, Mama, I'm Coming Home. Proved Ozzy didn't need Black Sabbath. He was the very definition of heavy metal. And throughout the 90s, even as grunge and alternative took over, Ozzy held his throne by pouring out his torn soul, screaming through the whirlwind of a rapidly shifting musical era. But Ozzy wasn't just music. A strange, genius turning point came in 2002 when he and his family starred in the reality TV show The Osbournes. The world saw a different Ozzy, chaotic, unfiltered, but deeply emotional, and millions went wild. From metal legend, he became a global pop culture icon. Ozzy had conquered not just the stage, but the screen. With a bathrobe and stammering voice, he redefined what it meant to be a star. He didn't stop. He founded Ozfest, the greatest metal festival of the 2000s, a battlefield for Slipknot, Korn, System of a Down. Ozzy didn't just survive, he gave life to a new generation of metal. While many veteran artists faded or quit, Ozzy stood tall, screaming to the crowd, eyes burning like when he was 30. Then, after years of silence, seemingly pushed into permanent darkness by Parkinson's and injuries, Ozzy shocked the world in 2020 with Ordinary Man, a gloomy, introspective, tear-soaked album. But it wasn't weak, it was a living will. Ozzy reflecting on his life through bloodstained riffs. Under the Graveyard left the world breathless. No one expected at nearly 72 that Ozzy could still roar like that. And he wasn't done. In 2022, he released Patient Number 9, his final album before death. Featuring Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Zakk Wylde and Tony Iommi, it was a last symphony with legendary warriors. The album won a Grammy. The world was stunned Ozzy had returned, leaving behind a battle cry for the last madman standing on the musical battlefield. Then, at the Back to the Beginning concert on July 5, 2025, right in Birmingham, he sat on an iron throne voice, flickering like a dying candle, yet every word sliced through the air. The entire Villa Park Stadium screamed, cried, sang with him. That wasn't a concert, it was a canonization. Ozzy, from a Birmingham street kid to immortal icon, closed the final chapter with a metal storm, just as he had opened it. By the time he was recognized as a pop culture legend, Ozzy had sold over 100 million records worldwide. Even as his health declined and he stopped performing, live independent data showed his creative catalog continued to sell steadily every year. His voice became the subject of study in musicology, linguistics, and expressive education in leading academies. Though he's gone, Ozzy's greatest legacy is the music. Over 50 years of battle, over 100 million records sold, from Black Sabbath's thick riffs to the wild highs and lows of his solo work, Ozzy became the gospel of heavy metal. Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, No More Tears, Mama, I'm Coming Home were more than songs. They were bloodlines of tradition, cries from the abyss that every lost rocker hears when wandering too far. One can't ignore the cultural legacy Ozzy left behind. He wasn't just a voice, he was a symbol. He was once banned from airwaves, once bit off a bat's head on stage, once called Satan his friend, but also once cried for his children, his wife, his mistakes. That contradiction, fierce yet human, made Ozzy the blueprint for a true artist, fragile, rebellious, and never surrendering. Beyond art, Ozzy left behind a spiritual legacy, the spirit of defying prejudice, overcoming destruction, and never bowing down. A man who nearly went to prison for violence, who attempted suicide, who was fired from the band he founded, but still became a legend. To Ozzy, failure wasn't the end. It was the start of another madness, louder and stronger. To the young who ever felt isolated, ever called weird, Ozzy's music was refuge. They found empathy in his mad lyrics, light in the very darkness he sang, because Ozzy never sang from glory, he sang from ruin. And from ruin, he created art. In the end, perhaps the greatest legacy Ozzy Osbourne left behind is the ideal of defiance. A man from the working-class streets of Birmingham, poorly educated, violent, addicted, rejected by every label, turned his shattered life into a rock and roll epic. And as he once said, I'm no hero, I'm just a survivor, and I sing so that other survivors don't feel alone. Ozzy is gone, but his words still echo. On the radio, in lonely bedrooms, on the stages of young bands, in every drumbeat, and in every tiny rebellion of the souls, he inspired not to accept their fate. Ozzy Osbourne is gone, leaving behind not just a massive fortune, but an unrivaled treasure trove of legacy. His music is an eternal flame in the hearts of rebels, a scream from the abyss that pulled millions out of despair. But while the world mourns, his will ignites a storm of suspicion. Why did Sharon inherit all music rights real estate and the Ozzy brand? And most curious of all, that will was signed just weeks before his death, while Ozzy was weak and completely dependent on Sharon. Was it just coincidence, or was it all premeditated? Comment your thoughts below. And if you, like us, still choke up every time Crazy Train plays, then hold on to that flame. Thank you for following Ozzy Osbourne's final journey. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the next secrets behind the legend, where perhaps the truth is even crazier than his music.